another minute here for those that are just walked in. Welcome to the Techqueria Summit. This is my third Techqueria, so welcome. This is a great community. You'll have a lot of fun here, learn a lot, as well as interact with a lot of interesting people. It's one of the greatest things about this organization is you're always meeting new people all the time. So welcome. I see some hello from New York. I see some from Seattle. Go ahead and put where you're coming from in the chat. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Richard Lopez, founder Fuego CLO, Techqueria San Diego Chapter Director, and 2024 San Diego Business Journal 40 Under 40. Also, most likely to have 3 cafecitos before breakfast. I'm joined by my co-moderator, Amber Tarak, founder and CEO of Founder Fuego, a bilingual resource hub for business and nonprofits. She'll be our co-moderator. She was awarded the Latina Business Leader of the Year 2024 by National Latina Business Women of San Diego. Fun fact, Amber's first job was really in elementary school. She was the bank. And so she's charging interest since, 1990 something. Let's go ahead and
thanks for the warm welcome.
You're welcome. Let's go ahead and introduce this amazing panel that we have today. These are people that are pillars in our community. I'm always really excited to meet them at events. I'm drawn to them. I always love having conversations. So this is an amazing opportunity to have just a great conversation together about a very important topic today. If you're in the room today, we're going to be talking about Innovation Unleashed. And Amber's going to tell you a little bit more about what we're going to go through today. But I want to introduce these amazing panelists today. We'll start with Alex Waters, the Executive Director of the Program Labs. He designed, launched, and operated San Diego's first low to moderate income and diversity-focused business accelerator program. He served as the lean innovation coach for enterprises, Techstars mentor, startup ecosystem builder. He's also a track jacket enthusiast, aspiring DJ, and recovering existentialist. We have Julius Alejandro. He's our executive director of Village Up San Diego, co-founded Village Up, a regional collaborative focus on mental wellness and access to resources for diverse founders, educating in higher education, runs leadership programs for young adults. He has an active lifestyle. He's a SoundCloud rapper, and he's finding the best burger he can find. We're also joined by David Favela, director of UCSD Talent Foundry, a tech incubator for diverse entrepreneurs, 20 years of tech management experience at HP in various areas. Also the founder of Border X Brewing and Mujeres Brewhouse. Fun fact, James Beard nominated for excellence in 2020. Thank you for being here. An unofficial tío of the San Diego Techqueria chapter. So let's go ahead and jump into our agenda here to kick things off. We're going to go ahead and pass it on to you. Amber, tell us a little bit about what we're going to cover today.
Absolutely. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to these amazing panelists. The goal for today's session, we really want you to walk away with some amazing key takeaways that you can implement in your own communities. We're really going to touch on why diversity, equity, and inclusion matter in the tech ecosystem, and really discuss the importance of diverse inclusion and diverse representation and building strategic partnerships. You'll find that based on everyone on this panel and the introductions you just heard, these folks are experts in engaging their communities and really building that collaborative community and strategic partnerships. You're also going to learn more about their entrepreneurial journeys, their challenges and successes that they faced as diverse business owners and nonprofit leaders. Richard, I'll kick it back over to you to start off with our first question for the panel.
Yes. So let's go ahead and get started with the general question, which is, can you share what inspired you to create or lead the organization that you're leading? So that way you can tell us a little about your organization as well as what inspired you. Let's go ahead and start with Alex.
Thanks. So first, I'm excited to be here. Excited to hopefully get a chance to answer the questions that you folks kind of have. But I don't know. It's what's the saying? You know, when a door closes, a window opens, I guess, if you will. And so that's kind of the inspiration behind the Program Labs. I was doing some stuff with Jacob Center, running an accelerator program, doing some funding things and sale of a building that kind of closed out. And so I was thinking, okay, what are other opportunities to continue to help the community, help individuals who are specifically building these kind of programs, while at the same time being able to continue running business sort of support services. And so that's kind of what led me to doing it. And what inspires me, I guess, to do it is really wanting to help those that are helping others. And so there's a lot of folks doing a lot of great work. And if I can add any information or details that I have, I'm always do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Let's go ahead and take it over to Julius. What inspired you, and tell us more about what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you, Richard and Amber, for having me here. What inspired me was I'm involved in the startup ecosystem in 2016 with Alex at Startup Week, helping plan. We were part of the core team of Startup Week, and during that time, the issue of saying, "Hey, we have a diversity issue," keeps coming up, it keeps coming up, but that's where it stops. It loves to keep coming up, but in regards to solution base, it just stops there. That's where the narrative starts. And to me, my background before being in this ecosystem is I'm a nonprofit professional, and in the nonprofit world, we have tried and true method of addressing systemic change and issues. And I thought, like, well, like it was happening in respects like, but it's like one time in silos. I'm like, well, it's a regional effort. I'm a nonprofit professional, like I know how to solve issues. There's models out there. So I just took that model and brought it here. So we started off in 2020 of all the time of the year. And we started as a community organization. The benefit of Zoom, there's no excuse. No one was going anywhere. So people showed up to meetings. And again, the thing is, you can't just bring people together as some type of kumbaya. So what we did was we created a regional survey because we need to address what's the real problem. We need data driven, and that put us on the map. And naturally, it became a nonprofit. So that's kind of like the bridge story.
Thank you so much, Julius. And yeah, no, I think 2020 was a lot of things for a lot of people, and we created a lot of things as well. So thanks for being that change. David, go ahead and tell us what inspired you and what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I hope I'm not being too philosophical, but ever since I was a small child crossing the border, I realized that the world was different just because of the border. And it was different because people had a different history and a different way of thinking. And the thing about the United States is we just had a better mechanism for taking ideas from an idea into fruition. I mean, everything from our built environment, including this bottle, was someone's innovation, right? And luckily here in the US, there's a lot of paths to take ideas into reality. And what I realized, though, working at HP in different environments is I didn't really see a lot of diversity. And I think that over half of our population hasn't been given the tools and the processes and the ability to have their own innovations and their visions come to fruition. So when this opportunity came to create this here at the UCSD and the Talent Foundry, and using lean methodology and customer discovery and all those great tools that I think have emerged in the last few decades, I think, I don't know, I feel a sense of obligation to pass on some of those methodologies and advice to help the next generation come up and ultimately make a better world for all of us, whatever their innovation is.
Thank you, David. Amber, you start for the next question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your insights there. So I wanted to dive into how has your tech innovation journey evolved over time? What do you wish you would have known when you first started?
I'll get started if you like. So I came from the corporate world, and it was kind of insular. Like we mostly dealt with within our four walls. And when I started the brewery, because I also started Border X and Mujeres Brew House, I really didn't realize what the ecosystem looked like. I wasn't aware that everything that was available. And it really wasn't until just recently when I started Talent Foundry that I realized that there was this huge ecosystem out there. And I wish I could go back in time and have made better use of the mentors and advisors and just really the resources that are out there to help us build. And I think I'm not that different from most startups. A lot of people don't know what they don't know. And I think it's our obligation to try to figure out how we penetrate more different social groups and different environments and get the word out more broadly.
Yeah. So for me, so my humble beginning is origin story is actually I'm a community organizer. Started from the in Filipino community, like community organizing, like leading a march. But essentially, what was happening was I was learning entrepreneurship without being called entrepreneurship, relationship building. How do you leverage resources, right? How to raise funds, get sponsors. In this term will be investors. So so I got those little genesis in the beginning, and when I got into building Village Up, it was essentially kind of using that. And actually, it was my time at Help Planning Startup Week gave me just being immersed in the ecosystem. I spent from 2017 to 2019 just learning, even before starting. Like, what's venture? What does the lean Canva means? What's our accelerators? And not only that, who's who does what's the investor? What are the groups? So I was more of a sponge and just kind of keep my head low and just understanding how things are. Again, I'm a sociologist, so to me that's fascinating how like the makeup of each system and how they interact. So I spend more time learning before I actually basically burn the social capital on this crazy idea.
Yeah, and I think for me, so I kind of cut my teeth in ed tech. So I spent a lot of years inside of a tech company that was sort of high growth, all the kinds of things that people talk about in terms of startup and technology, and seeing how that looked from the inside. And then obviously going into sort of building and creating sort of environments or opportunities for folks to start businesses, whether it's tech or other. I think the biggest thing that I wish I would have known when I first started is to throw out more wild ideas, right? I mean, just like moonshot ideas, crazy kinds of things. Because I think a lot of times what happens is most folks are a little bit measured as they enter into somewhat of a space, right? You're worried that people aren't going to think that your ideas are great, or, oh, well, I can't do these different kinds of things. But a lot of times people are kind of thinking some of the same things that you might be as it relates to wanting to either push to do something different or test and try something new. And so when if I had to go back and look at it, I would have been much bolder in the beginning of just like trying and testing things and really digging into kind of the spirit of innovation, if you will, because you see that getting rewarded over time. As people are like, well, you might not have had any ideas that came to fruition, but you're a big thinker or a systems thinker or these kinds of things like that. So that for me is what I would have changed from when I first started.
Thank you all so much. So really finding that the mentorship right early on is super helpful, and then taking that, I love that, the moonshot chance on something new, right, and kind of really stretching yourself beyond maybe your comfort zone. Knowing like a lot of the folks in the audience, whether they're looking for a job in tech or currently work in tech or somehow want to be involved in their innovation ecosystem, we really appreciate your perspectives on okay, these are some key takeaways and strategies folks can use in respect to this. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Richard, you want to take the next question?
Yeah, and speaking of getting out of your comfort zone, so the question I'm going to ask is a two-part question here, but what unique challenges have you faced related to your identity or background as a diverse business owner or nonprofit leader? And then I also want to know, how'd you leverage diversity as a competitive advantage in the entrepreneurship or tech space? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but how does that relate to your journey? And I'll open the floor to anybody that wants to answer that.
Oh, sorry.
Julius, you made a noise there, so now you got to go.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's interesting. For me, it's like in regards to DEI, diversity, person of color. So I'm Filipino, but then again, Asian is categorized. So, but again, being Filipino, I'm the only Filipino active in the San Diego innovation scene. So there's a sense of feeling lonely too. And also I have a visible disability. So there's multiple identities that come into play. So it's always mindful. And also doing the diversity work, just being I was part of a program called the Rise San Diego, from Rise San Diego fellowship program, that we explore DEI in a very layered and sometimes really deep sense. So it's always open, and also being mindful, like who's on the room, like speakers, right? Like when we get speakers, we're very intentional, and also we hire in in regards to the vendors, we also have to keep in mind that, hey, we want to hire diversity and taking chances. When Alex was with Jacob Center, I took a risk of like, hey, you have food people, they're untried, but you know what? Let's give them a chance. So it's things like that, like taking chances too, and also just being aware and being really intentional. Like, hey, the dollars we get from companies, we circulate it back and we show that in our report. So it's being really intentional, and also intentional for me because again, it's multiple lenses too of identity and being mindful. Like, who's not in the room? That's always in my mind. Who do we need to outreach and invite?
Thanks for sharing, Julius. Alex, it looks like you wanted to chime in right after Julius, so
Yeah.
take it away.
I was gonna say, I mean, like, just being honest, right? Like, if you are, especially in tech space, if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, like, those kinds of things like become very glaring when you start to get into certain spaces where it's like people don't look like you, right? And while they may share some similarities, they may share some sort of thoughts, ideas, backgrounds, education, things like that. But I do think though that like that is just a challenge of finding individuals that you feel comfortable with. And it kind of goes back, I think, to my point before about like really pushing the envelope and trying new things. A lot of times, if you don't feel like you're in a safe space or that people are going to understand sort of where you're coming from, your perspective, then you're much less likely to sort of do that, right? And so then maybe opportunities or different kinds of things might not be available. I think on the sort of competitive advantage side, though, it does create this, people use the term like resilience, grit, but it does do that, right? Like when you aren't necessarily feeling like you're inside of the, circle, you get very creative in figuring out how you're going to do stuff and often having to do more with less, which for, many nonprofit leaders or even people who are in businesses and things like that, they've had to experience that because they don't get as much to be able to do other things, especially sort of in the tech space. So I think while it's not awesome to have to do more with less consistently, right? It's not like a fantastic thing to be like, oh, this is great. I often have to do way more with less all the time. It does create sort of this level of resilience and grit and ability to get things done that other folks don't necessarily have all the time.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question about identity and how we retain it and still be successful. I know when I was at Hewlett Packard, I would sit on a lot of executive councils and teams, and I always seemed to be the guy out of left field with the kind of crazy idea that challenges the groupthink, and it causes a lot of anxiety and frustration because you're kind of like, is there something wrong with me? Why do I see it this way? Why am I the only one? And that was actually quite a serious challenge for me as I was coming up through the ranks. And I didn't know if I was flawed. Why is it that I thought differently? And but I stuck to my guns because I don't think we have a choice other than to be authentic to ourselves and to conclude with our own mind, because you'll always be mediocre if you're just trying to fit the game or, go along with the game plan. You're giving away the most valuable thing that you have, which is diversity of perspective and diversity of thought and diversity and independence of contribution. And I would add to that a similar thing happened to me when I started up in the craft beer industry. The craft beer industry is awesome, but it's mostly white males. And I recall that there was a lot of groupthink. So when we started the brewery, everyone would say, well, where's your IPA and where's your lager and all of this? And we didn't even make those. We were a Mexican craft brewery and we wanted to define ourselves based off of the beers that we wanted to make. And it did cost us a lot of customers. You could literally see, craft beer aficionados come in, ask for their lager or their triple IPA. We'd say we don't have it, but we have a cucumber sour or a horchata golden stout or some other beer. And then walk out. Like, we literally left money on the table. But I think, again, you have no choice other than be authentic to yourself and your ideas. And that did eventually lead to our James Beard nomination for Outstanding Producer. And I think it was because of that uniqueness that I stuck to my guns and it felt right. And I had the opportunity to prove that in the marketplace. And, we're 11 years into this space now, and I wouldn't have changed a single thing. So I would just say it takes courage. It's hard, but you can't be anyone but yourself.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of love on the chat, David. Mexican beer, love that you stuck to your roots. You're getting some good praise here for doing that. And I have to agree with you guys. I mean, I've fallen into roles myself, not just because of culture, maybe because of language, and then all of a sudden now you're in charge of that. I think a lot of things can be gained but also lost, like moving from one location to another. I've had this talk with Alex before, going from the East Coast to the West Coast, really understanding different types of cultures. And I'm with you, Julie. Sometimes you feel like you're alone. Like, I think I'm the only Cuban in at least 3,000 miles from the next Cuban in San Diego. But you connect more to your culture when you're away from it as well. And we create this dynamic that allows other people to feel safe and confident in their own journey with their own culture. So very interesting. But a lot of times, yeah, we are brought into that ERG, HR role because we might have the ability to connect with people who may be different, but it's not always the case. Go ahead, Julius.
Yeah. So I was talking to my mentor in regards to culture. Filipinos and the land culture is very similar. And I realized I'm doing this instinctively because just how I was brought up is there's a Filipino term called samahan, which means together. We always bring everyone together, and to me, it always makes sense. We always make people welcome. Especially in Village Up, I kind of ingrain that, including my interns. I make sure like, hey, we're all together. So when I was talking to my mentor, like, wow, he just talking about like, hey, how our culture played in our respective roles. And I realized I've been doing that instinctively because that's how I was brought up. That's what I know is ingrained with me. So in Village Up, I make sure like, hey, we're all together. Like let's include everyone. But they're like, hey, they might not show up. Like, it doesn't matter. Just include everyone. Most likely. But we just because we want to. There's a sense of I just want people to feel like they belong. And again, that's how I leverage my culture, and I realize I've been doing it instinctively.
So really leaning into your authenticity, right? And really, understanding, who you are, your background, your experiences, and bringing all of those layers to the table. I love that. I love that. And really, it sounds like too, in each of your organizations, you've leveraged, again, your backgrounds, experiences, and that the diversity of thought and leadership that you bring to the table in each of your respective organizations. Really appreciate all of that feedback. I wanted to ask, and along these same lines, it was a great segue. You all are amazing champions of increasing the number of women in the tech space. What actionable strategies would you recommend for companies to make spaces more inclusive for women in tech?
So
That's a good question, and I'm actually contemplating that. When I think about lean startup and I ask people how familiar they are with that methodology when I speak at panels, and I find that it's not as widespread as I'd like to believe. I was speaking at SDSU and I asked a graduating class of 200 students, who's heard of lean startup? And I saw 4 hands go up out of 200. And it's not to say, it's just not a common topic. But one of the things that I believe is lean methodology brings is a career building way of thinking as well. Lean methodology is about finding problems, not waiting for the brilliant solution to drop from the sky. And I think in my own career, the thing that defined me is I always looked for problems to solve, right? And then I brought a whole methodology to solve it before I knew what lean was. And so I developed the key no's to kind of find where I call them opportunities in the industry. And I think that we need to give women and other underrepresented groups access to these tools. And we need to do more training on how to think about their career. Because I'll tell you one thing, for example, an erroneous thought. If you think that if you just do a good job within your job duty responsibilities and wait for promotions, it's not going to happen. I've managed hundreds of people at Hewlett Packard, and unless the company's exploding and there's all kinds of opportunities and people are rising with the growth, if you're a static or rare or not that fast growing company, you have to develop a reputation for being a problem solver and reaching outside of your area of responsibility, for contributing more in terms of being to identify opportunities that not even your managers or their managers are aware of. And I created a long career just based off of doing that kind of work. And I think women would, given the right tools and kind of way of thinking about this, could succeed even more. Because in my own study of executives and why they rise within the ranks when there are so many well-qualified people, it often comes back to they seized an opportunity and they did an incredible job and they got on that elevator instead of the staircase that we're all on.
Yeah, great points. And this is always a tough question because I think it always fundamentally goes back to like, are the companies actually serious about doing it? And for a lot of times, like people will say things, but it's, like if you say, okay, hey, well, I'm a company and I would love to have more women who are coming into the organization and, being a part of what we're building, then like, are you actually doing the things that would yield those results, right? Are you actually going to spaces and places where there are, brilliant and innovative women who want opportunities in tech to be able to do that, right? And if the question is like, if the answer is no, we're not doing that, we're not specifically targeting, then like, it's very hard to say that there's going to be a, vast increase because at the end of the day, a lot of people go where they are actually appreciated. It can be very challenging. I was talking about being like the only in a space, but for women, and specifically women in tech, it's even worse when you look at the numbers and the distribution so if you really want, and companies really want to do that, it first starts with like a commitment to doing it, right? And it's not like, oh, well, when it's convenient, it's actually like, no, we're actively going to be doing these things. We're actively going to be, setting up opportunities. If you find that, in a lot of cases, there's at least from what I've seen, is like, there's a lot of women that start in companies, but then over time, they just leave. The environments are toxic. They're not great places to be. They don't feel appreciated. And so it's like, I'm leaving. So if you know that that's happening or occurring inside your organization or company or nonprofit or whatever, like, why is that? And how do you sort of set interventions to be able to make it so that folks don't want to leave, that they want to be there? And if they do leave, it's only because there's a much greater opportunity versus, individuals that, don't have the opportunity to kind of grow and build inside the company. So I guess I say all that to say, the biggest part is companies really being committed to it and making it an effort to really actually do it and not just sort of pay lip service to it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Julius. Before you get started, I just want to quickly tag in the chat. I mean, everyone is chiming in about lean startup, also how important it is to create that environment, like Alex was just saying, of, how intentional are we being as an organization to really make it a welcoming environment for women. Julius, I know you're going to hop in there too with your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, just going off on what everyone said, especially what Alex said, we're unique. We're a nonprofit. We help support diverse founders. So we're on the kind of supporting entity side. It's really intentional. Like, so if you're decision makers, you have the power to do whatever you want. And, so we decided, hey, we're going to have a women only focus event. If you're decision makers, you could do that, especially for the nature of Village Up. And last week, 2 weeks ago, we had an all-women event. I was only male there because I was the legal representative, but we had 40 women in event only, and it was magnificent. And guess what? I was supposed to be the facilitator, but no, I was intentional. I cannot be a facilitator for a women event. I took a risk of my two basically brand new facilitators that were women. But you know what? It has to be intentional. And there's a trust too. There's always a sense of trust. Like, I trust them for this women event to reflect, because again, it has to be intentional. So if you're a decision maker, if you have the power, take that risk, create that change, be intentional.
I love that. I also attended that women only event the other day with Julius. And I do appreciate how intentional that was, right? To make sure, again, it was a safe space for everybody in the room. And it was an incredible, moment, as far as being in that event. So thank you, Julius, for that, that commentary. And again, the story of how this looks in practice. As a Latina woman, I've had, experiences in the workplace and in tech in particular where, there's an expectation that, you take what you're offered, you don't negotiate your salary, or, you just, kind of, you have to work harder than the person next to you to really, show that you're capable and competent. And so that's where, everyone in this room today, I really appreciate, again, your perspectives and just being able to kind of have that communal conversation about it, because again, each one of you is so inclusive and intentional in how you operate in this ecosystem. So again, thank you so much for your perspectives. Back to you, Rich.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in too, because I have a very interesting perspective. I'm the only male in a women-led company. And I think that some of the things that I've seen, at least from my perspective, is that allowing that room for that support system of women supporting women and not having to get in the way of that. There are times where it's not about what I have to think or have to say, but allowing that space for those conversations to occur. And I think that that's important. I wanted to get into the next topic of conversation here, which is for the people in the room today who may be located across, different countries. I know some people are coming in now from other sessions that are 30 minutes. This is the 1 hour session. So for those people that are in the room today that are maybe from different places and spaces that are looking to engage with their local tech ecosystem, where do they start?
Wait a second. So the people looking to connect in the local ecosystem, where do they start?
Yeah, where they start, because they may be from different walks of life, different, not everybody here is from San Diego, they're from all over the country. They're looking to connect with their local tech ecosystem. Where do they start?
It's a great question.
This might be difficult because we have to get outside of our own local lens. So Go ahead, Alex.
I think I would say like the place to start is find a org and then start volunteering. It doesn't matter what it is, just start volunteering, right? Because I think what winds up happening with that is if you start to give to the sort of the tech ecosystem or the tech community, you'll find yourself in spaces and places that you wouldn't have thought that you would wind up being in, because you are providing some assistance, some help, some volunteering, and then it doesn't have to be like, oh, I have to, spend, hours and hours and hours and hours doing it, right? But like, if you're interested in your local tech ecosystem, find a tech conference and say, hey, you know what? I'll volunteer, right? And just you being there for a half a day volunteering, you'll start to meet all these people. But the interesting part about it is the way that you meet them is different. Right? It's like if you get an introduction to somebody through a friend versus if somebody just walks up to you and you don't know who they are, right? The fact that people are meeting you as a part or a proxy of this organization, it changes how people actually sort of view you, what opportunities are there, how you're around. So I can without a doubt say that one of the reasons why, I've known so many different people in San Diego and in sort of the startup and tech and small business and nonprofit ecosystem has a lot to do with when I was first getting into it. I volunteered a lot, right? With a lot of different orgs, just because I was trying to learn. And, people, you'd be very surprised at how effective that is, because every city is a little bit different, right? I can't say, well, go here, go there, but find an org that you like or you want to learn more about. That you appreciate and you feel like, they'll appreciate your time that you're spending there, and just go volunteer. And it unlocks all of these doors and opportunities for folks.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. I think you've got to get your foot into the door, and you've got to volunteer, or you've got to go to the local university. Most universities have some programs, or look up your nonprofits, and that's definitely the first step. The second step, I think, if I could go back in time, is be more intentional about what events are available and which ones are going to match you best. There are many different kinds of incubators, accelerator groups, causes, etc. And you kind of need to get a little taste of all of them to kind of understand, like, who's your tribe. And you'll find the people and the services and kind of like the vibe that's going to fit you best. And I think that's what's great about having an innovation ecosystem here in San Diego is you have a lot of different options. And it's going to depend on what your interests are and how you like to engage with folks. So I'd really encourage get your foot in, but then spread out and try to find out everything that's going on and find your tribe.
Yeah. What those two said, definitely volunteer. I was telling my mentees, it's comfort. Again, it's an ecosystem, right? We're interacting. We all know each other, David, Alex, Amber, we all know each other. We see each other at events. There's a sense of comfort, So again, also think about how you conduct yourself, be a learner. Don't be bombastic and think you know everything, because that's the quickest way of, you're that person. Compared to oh wow, they want to learn, let's intro. It's all about relationship and comfort, Again, I know my take of the San Diego innovation ecosystem. It's big, multi-billion dollars go in, but it's the same people. Again, it's that comfort, we feel comfortable with each other. I got you because again, there's years of relationship building. Again, protect your reputation and just be cool.
I love that. And so with the relationship building, though, at one point or another, somebody was new to that San Diego tech ecosystem, right? And so they had to be brave and kind of step into that space and perhaps push outside of their comfort zone, not knowing anybody in that circle. And then now we run into each other all the time in these circles, right? Because, and you build those, to your point, Julius, those relationships over time. I just want to chime in on the chat. Everything that you all are saying is really, resonating for the audience. Folks are talking about these same topics in their chats. Folks are really saying, volunteer, get involved in your local community, really explore those organizations, from a volunteering standpoint, but also just understanding what's out there in the ecosystem. What does resonate for you as an individual in whatever community you're in. Richard, we also have a couple questions in the Q&A as well that are kind of starting to stack up too. So just so you know.
I just want to put a quick plug in for Techqueria, because Techqueria was something that I just was casually exploring, and I was looking at opportunities to meet other Latinos that were in tech, and I was technically in graphic design, presentation design, and I thought I was tech. As soon as I got into these meetings, they were like, well, I'm a software engineer, I'm a UX, web developer, and I felt a little out of place at first, but that giving yourself that freedom of exploring, you start to realize that there could be a need for you to then step up or be that player. And that's how I fell into the chapter director role with Techqueria. I said, why aren't we having tacos at an event called Techqueria? This needs to change. And because of these partnerships and these events that I've got to, you connect with somebody like David who can connect you to the right person. And there you go. We're creating a whole ecosystem in itself just by exploring this idea of, hey, maybe we should have tacos at this event. And all of a sudden now we have a community of people and there's an expectation there. And it's just brings a whole new vibe than what you were looking for. You've created something that didn't exist just by exploring something that you wanted. So,
yeah.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, David's incredibly supportive of tacos.
Border X Brewing.
And Mujeres.
Also plug there. But I don't know if it's a good time now to turn it over to a couple of questions that are on the chat. So thank you, Amber, for pointing that out.
Absolutely.
Kevin, absolutely. Tacos unite people. Tacos unite. Which one do you want to start with, Amber?
So there's a number of questions in the chat. So let's see. Let's start with, so what are your thoughts for overcoming the DEI initiatives that are being walked back or rolled back by certain industries and organizations? What are your thoughts on that? Or, how can, again, the folks in the audience, help with that?
Wow, that's a tough question. And I think, I guess I take that question two ways. One is from a policy perspective, if you can try to help influence policy. And the other one is from a personal perspective, right? What do you do now that these things are being walked back and not of value anymore to some of these companies? And I think what it does is it really puts pressure, at least on us as individuals, to really focus on our networks. Your number one career tool or asset, I should say, is your network, the people you know, where they work. And if you still want to progress in your career, even if there isn't a DIE initiative, or if you want to get a position in a company, that's why these organizations exist. I went to grad school here at UCSD, and I'm not ashamed to say that I use my alumni network to the max. And it still amazes me that people do not lean on me more in terms of getting information or insight into how to get jobs. And I don't know what it is. I'm probably a little guilty of that. We kind of feel like we're bothering someone or they're not willing. But you have to understand, we leveraged our alumni network and we have to pay it back. So a lot of us are just kind of waiting there for people to reach out to us and say, hey, can you help me? And I don't know why, but in lieu of having a DEI program that helps open up doors, we're going to have to open up our own doors. And we're our own best asset to do that.
I know for Bojo, we're data driven. Again, when we started, it was like, well, the rhetoric was we have a diversity issue, which is prima facie, so we need data. So even now, we're doing impact reports showcasing the importance, how many diverse founders we amplify, and also who's attending, the demographic on that. And again, success stories like last year where we connected a financial institution with a startup or undisclosed fund, but it was a significant injection of capital. So those stories are happening, right? Again, but we're using narrative and we're using data to help. Again, can it go with policy? We want to go with policy, but we need data and storytelling too, and case studies.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and some of which the language in it is not suitable for a panel discussion. Yeah, I think the biggest thing around this is just being very, very mindful and watching people, and as folks say, having people to account for how they actually feel about things, right? Obviously there was a large sort of push, and all these companies said, we care about all the different folks, and then immediately when it became, not helpful for them, they decided to abandon these things. And so for me, the way I look at it is I'm going to just hold people to account for what they say and what they do and how they're operating. And I think internally, either inside organizations, or I highly encourage folks to find groups and people who can help and support them as they are in organizations, right? Because it is very tricky when, people will say things like, for example, in venture capital, right? If you look at the statistics and the numbers of, minority founders and women founders that get venture capital dollars, right? Like mathematically, it wouldn't be possible if you had random samplings that constantly come up with 97% go to males and white males. That would be virtually impossible. So clearly people are operating in that kind of way. They're just not saying it. And so for me, when I look at it, it's okay, we have to be very clever about how we go about ensuring that folks are getting opportunities and being very mindful of wanting to put people in positions to actually be able to get an opportunity they might not have, where before we could have said, hey, here's a scholarship for this group, or here's a training program for this group, because we know that we have an issue. As companies start to scrap those, we really, really have to be, very diligent in how we go about sort of addressing that. Because I'm actually really worried about it, because I think the lawsuits are going to keep coming. And I think when people have the path of least resistance, they're just going to go with what's expedient, right? Oh, well, we didn't really believe in that anyway. It was a marketing ploy. And so now we don't do it. But we also, from our end, just as consumers or anything, we have the whole companies accountable. right? If you launched a program and you said that, hey, I believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then all of a sudden you get rid of it, okay, then I need to not buy your products. I need to not use your services because you don't align with my values. And I think that's a really, really big piece of it.
And just to add to that, Alex, very good points. But also, like, if you're looking for a job in tech, these are the kind of questions you need to understand about a company, a prospective company that you're looking to perhaps get into. Understand what are their, do they have employee resource groups, for example, or are they, actively engaged, with different, diverse populations and seeking out diverse populations to have a large recruitment pool, right? Like seeing what kind of intentionality they have in their practices, make sure you're evaluating that as you're evaluating those different types of tech opportunities. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Alex, just real quick, I know the founder of Hello Alice actually did the opener for today's conference. So I just want to acknowledge that. And so Alex was referring to the Hello Alice and Fearless Fund were recently, sued by a conservative group and, had to settle on that lawsuit. But essentially it was for a fund that was intentionally giving grants to Black women. And so essentially those activities had to be paused because of this lawsuit. And so, those are the types of lawsuits, we're talking about when we're looking at these DEI initiatives getting rolled back. And so that's just something for everyone in the room to be aware of kind of the environment and climate that's out there right now. Richard, I know you had something to add.
Well, I just wanted to add that sometimes it's even with the best intention of bringing in inclusion that sometimes if not done properly, it can really feel like tokenism. And I think this is a really great point that we had a great conversation after Innovation Day. And it was about that, you could also reach out to us after Hispanic Heritage or on not on Black History Month. And I think it's important to know that even in the best attempts of inclusion, it doesn't need to be brought in with the dynamic of it has to be done at this very point in time, because then it could be perceived, even if it's with its best intention, as tokenism or creating this dynamic where we feel obligated to be there to represent an entire race and ethnicity, which is almost, impossible to do.
Again, thank you all for your comments on that. I do have a question in the chat I wanted to address. I've encountered situations where a lack of collaboration from some Latinx and women colleagues has impacted our team's ability to achieve our goals. How can I address this constructively? So I'll take a crack at responding to this as a Latina woman on this panel here today. I would challenge you, Amy, to think about what is the environment and the culture of your company, or where these Latinx and women are colleagues are working. For example, is the culture, do they feel like they're being heard as part of projects? Are they being fully included on projects? For example, I've been in rooms on teams before where I'd have, a white male colleague, literally repeat my ideas in team meetings, and nobody in the room was stepping up to say, hey, actually, that was, Amber's idea. So I think, having kind of that moment of taking a step back and going, well, what is the team dynamic happening in those types of situations? And how can you make that environment safer for a Latinx or woman colleague to feel like they're being included in these types of projects? Because there's something happening, as far as the hindering not only your team's ability to achieve the goals, but something else is happening in this dynamic that I think needs to get examined, a little bit further. So again, as the Latinx woman on this, I wanted to share that perspective. And oftentimes we kind of have those moments in teams where maybe we aren't feeling included or safe to bring forward ideas that differ than the rest of the group's ideas. So that's another thing, like thinking about how you can create a culture of again, this is kind of the thing we've been talking about, intentionality and safety for women on your team or for Latinx, colleagues on your team. But I wanted to throw it out to the group as well. Do you have thoughts on this, on how to handle this type of dynamic when there's some challenges with Latinx and women colleagues impacting a team's ability to achieve goals?
Yeah, I think for me initially, I think sometimes it's like, is it specifically around like because it's somebody Latinx or a woman on the team, and I think it goes back to something Richard pointed about sometimes people are just people, right? And there could be cases where it's just like, this person is just not an awesome person, right? And it may not have anything specifically to do with sort of their background or their gender. They just could not be a collaborative person. They don't like working with folks. And so I try to be careful sometimes about, in some cases, about it from the standpoint of like, oh, well, they're intentionally doing it, and we should all collectively kind of be together as we're sort of moving forward. But it's definitely challenging, especially if you're in an environment where there's not a lot of people, and especially for women in tech, and there's not a lot of, like, there is a sense of like wanting to, I know for me, I can speak for myself, like when I've been in companies, different spaces, like if I'm the only Black person that's around and there's another Black person, like immediately it's like, okay, well, I assume that we are somewhat aligned and on the same page. And sometimes that's just not the case, and it's unfortunate. And so I think having to figure out, like, what does that actually sort of look like? Is it because a person just is not a cool person to work with and doesn't want to sort of collaborate? Or is there something a little bit deeper there?
Yeah, exactly what Alex said. I know for me, my team are basically 90% are all women, like for past 2 years, and remote too. And they're Gen Z. They're like 20-something-year-olds. So I think for so far there's no conflict of complaint, thank goodness. But there's things I need to keep mindful. I'm very type A. I'm very like, do this, do this. And I have feedback. My style is very aggressive. It's basically this way, this way, this way. And again, I unpacked that, and that came from me being a community organizer. And we always operate of scarcity, survival mode. And again, this is a new generation. It's like, well, no, there's boundaries, and no. But that's how I was brought up. I was trained. Survival mode, do or die, straight up. Like, it's A or B. Like, let's get to it. So I need to unpack that. And I always need to be mindful on that. Again, I always have to be mindful of my action, how to be better. So there's also a sense of your own responsibility, of your own style. Because again, it's very masculine and very like, this way, this way, this way. And I'm like, okay, how can I impact that, to meet this new generation and their style? So it's a lot of unlearning and relearning also. So basically kind of check yourself too. Like, because I need to be mindful too. Like, how am I better? Am I being inclusive? Like, how's my style? And I always get that feedback. Like, I'm shocked when people like when I say, yeah, I asked my team for feedback. It's amazing how people are shocked of like, you asked for feedback on your style. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I want to be better. Like, I don't mind. Good, bad, like, just give it to me. Like, how can you improve? So I don't understand where's that coming from when people are shocked when they ask for a feedback, like an honest feedback, like, yo, be brutal, whatever. Like, I just want to be better. That's just me. I speak for myself.
That's called good management, is asking for feedback on your style and everything. And that's great. David, I know you had something to add.
Yeah, it actually occurred to me. I've got all kinds of input, but many of you have probably read the 4 Agreements, the book. And it just occurs to me that a lot of my own personal style comes from that as well. So the first thing I do is I don't take anything personal. Someone bites my head off in a meeting or, doesn't agree with what I was proposing or whatever. So I don't take it personal. Number 2 is I don't make assumptions like, oh, they're mad at me or why are we making any progress? I always try to have empathy and meet with the person afterwards and try to unpack what's going on. It could be that the person just got in a car crash earlier that morning, or they had a fight with their spouse, and I just happened to be the person that walked in and took the brunt of it. And there's a lot to be said for just not taking things personal, because I think it gives you kind of more clarity, more perspective, more ability to process. I think you said the word unpack and analyze kind of what was going on, what was the dynamic. And I think in my 22-year career at Hewlett Packard, that worked 100% of the time. Actually, I take it back, 99% of the time, because I also agree with Alex. Sometimes I just couldn't get there, no matter how genuine or authentic or in the moment or how much we analyzed it. There was one manager that we were the antithesis of each other, and just know that could happen. But I think for the other 99% of the time, empathy. Don't take things personal. Make no assumptions. Be careful with your word. That's another of the three or four agreements, and I forgot the fourth one. But always a good guide to live your life by.
No, I also wanted to add that just ask more questions. We don't know what they might be going through, and I think that one of the sayings that I like is that the highest form of human intelligence is to observe without judgment. And sometimes it's hard for managers just to observe and see what's going on because they might have something going on that we don't know. So it's always best to sometimes ask versus assume or try to fix things without asking.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one final question from the audience, and we'll just do a quick round robin because we're almost at time with our session. Any advice on relationship building virtually? I'm a remote worker, digital nomad for context.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just it would be the same thing that you would be able to do just in person. Like I would say from the context of like have a coffee, right? Like if you were going to be in your office and you were going to sit for 10, 15 minutes and just chat with a colleague or whatever, like you can do that remotely, right? And I've had situations and circumstances like just sit, have a 10-minute kind of thing. Hey, I'm going to have a coffee. You're going to have a coffee. We'll be on the Zoom collectively together, just talking about things that are outside the scope of work. I think those kinds of things that we typically tend to forget in virtual spaces, because it would be the same if you walked down the street to go grab a sandwich with your colleague at lunch, right? Like, and starting to build those kinds of relationships. It's the same thing. It's just it requires a little bit more intentionality, but you can find some of those spaces to be able to do it. So that would be kind of my advice.
Yeah, if I could build on it, I agree with that 100%. One of my mentors early in my career said, David, the way I get collaboration is I go to people before I need anything from them. Build that relationship, be authentic, have some context. Because if you only reach out to people when you need something or have a problem, it's not conducive to building relationships. And I've tried to do that consciously since I started.
Be proactive. That's what they said. Do it quarterly. Just like, hey, look to like do catch up. I did it with my mentees. They're all over the world, from Spain to SF. Just like once a quarter, like check in and being proactive. And they're like, wow, they appreciate that, and just check in. So be proactive, because it's one of those things. They're not gonna reach out to you, so you reach out to them. Mentality. It just the way it is. So be proactive.
And just to add to that real quick, if you haven't already, start building a LinkedIn network, and take time to connect with that network. Don't just kind of grab a bunch of folks in your network there, but take time to actually engage with them. Like the folks on this panel mentioned today, like have those virtual cafecitos or virtual lunch breaks or virtual happy hours, whatever it is. But make those meaningful connections, because you never know who might be a referral for a job in the future. You never know how you can help each other in the future, right? Talking about empathy and really being intentional about building a diverse and inclusive network is so important. So I know everyone's popping their LinkedIn's in the chat here, which I love. Like, make sure you're connecting with each other as part of the session. I wanted to just thank our incredible panelists and my co-moderator, Richard. Thank you so much, David, Alex, Julius. You have added such incredible value to this conversation. I just wanted to kind of put out some key takeaways that I got from this conversation, and Richard, feel free and add a couple more too. Take a chance and try something new. Step outside of your comfort zone. Be intentional in the different initiatives and projects and efforts you either participate in or lead. Make sure you're creating a safe space for others. Stick to your ideas and explore them. Sometimes it takes a little bit of exploration in the market to see if your ideas will have some traction. Authenticity is mission critical when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Going above and beyond, being intentional, volunteering in your local communities, and also being intentional in the events you attend. Closing remarks from David, Alex, Julius, or Richard. I just want to turn it over to you because we do need to wrap up our session in just a minute.
Someone reminded me of the fourth agreement. Do your best. And your best is going to be different every day, but do your best every day.
Yeah, I would say just really quickly. So we got all these LinkedIn's, everybody's connecting, but take that next step, actually schedule a meeting, actually send an email follow-up afterwards, right? There's so much brilliance and awesomeness in the room. Like, it'd be a shame if you just have a list of LinkedIns and you didn't actually schedule a Zoom call to find out what's going on with people. So I highly encourage folks to do that.
Yeah, and just to add on, when you for a LinkedIn request, there's a note saying, "Hey, thank you for speaking at the," so get context, So yeah.
In tech, sometimes you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Just like stepping into a space where you really don't know people. It's the same effort and fear that people have when they don't engage in the conversation, like Alex was saying. I would highly encourage you to take that step. And if you don't see something that exists, then create it yourself.
All right, and I hope our panelists don't mind. I just popped your LinkedIn's in the sidebar here, so I appreciate you. Thank you all so much for an awesome session, and thank you everyone for joining us as part of the audience. We truly appreciate you and your engagement as part of this conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of the sessions.